All right, today's day 16, and for today, I decided to talk a bit about my favorite science fiction kind of like book series, which is Dune. And I'm not boring to say that because the historical references that you will see once you read the book and watch the film, they're amazing. Like, if you know enough history and enough about the changes of kind of like times and the zeitgeist when Dune was written, you'll be also kind of interested to learn more about that. And for today, I decided to kind of establish the relationship between the Fremen and the nomads in the Arabic countries, mainly modern day Saudi Arabia. By the way, I love the design. Like, it's so cute. And again, while it's dense, it's absolutely worth a read because like there's so much that is not in the film, actually. Like the whole, if you know Dune, you know maybe the main plot, where you have Paul, he is kind of like the new messiah. His parents kind of inherit a new planet. They move there. They are being attacked by other royal families. Paul gets to the Fremen, which is a nomad kind of like population on the new planet which they inherited. Um, and that's essentially the first part. And at the end of the first book, and also the second movie, is Paul fighting or challenging the royal families and winning, essentially, in a sword fight and gaining access to being the Emperor of the Galaxies. I don't even know what the name of the Emperor is. We'll just call him Emperor. And this is how the first book ends. It ends with the second movie of Dune. And, you know, while the political situation is interesting, I don't think it portrays anything new, to be fair. What it does portray is, besides the Fremen and their connection to the nomads in Arabic countries and essential culture, you also have um, a struggle against technology, which I might not really talk about in this video, but maybe in another one. You have the struggle about climate change because the new country, or the new planet they inherit, Arrakis, is essentially a desert planet, which the nomad population is trying to populate with plants, right? And this kind of awakens the image of climate change. So that's also very interesting. There are a lot of adjacent books, not by Frank Herbert, the author, but by, I think, screenwriters and also people who were analyzing the influences for Frank Herbert and his works. And they do mention climate change, for instance, the struggle against technology. But for today, I just want to pick up my favorite, which is The Nomads. Now, here's the thing. These books, like I'll try to reference them down below, um, they focus on certain areas. So there's, I think, one book for specifically the cultural influence that he got for the Fremen, which is to be believed from the Arabs during the First World War. So essentially, what you had was under the Ottomans, right? Because most Arabs lived under the Ottoman Empire. What you had was nomads. So nomadic people are essentially folks who travel from one place to another. And because most of the Arabic countries, the modern ones that we know of, are deserts, you needed to be very adaptable and flexible in terms of relocating. Because staying in one place in the desert didn't really make much sense, except you came across maybe a fertile land for your animals, and obviously made sense to stay. But apart from that, if you couldn't find anything, and if you didn't find any habitable land, you were supposed to move, like you needed to move. And with the Fremen and Arrakis, it's the same thing, right? Arrakis is a desert planet. The Fremen, they are like grouped in smaller groups. That was such a dumb sentence. They were grouped in smaller kind of fractions, like the nomads essentially, but they moved without animals. They sustained themselves by underground communities, which obviously we don't have with the nomads of today. By the way, the nomads of today, they're called Bedouin. So they still exist in modern day Arabia, Saudi Arabia, specifically where Saudi Arabia wanted to build the line, if you know where that is. So the line is, oh, I think it was, they were trying to build something near Jeddah, I think, I don't remember. And that's where essentially you have the Bedouins, um, which resemble the Fremen. Coming back, the Fremen, they, sustain themselves with their own bodies and their fluids. You don't see that with nomads, but you see kind of like the parallels of desert and moving around. What you also see is Paul Atreides is European looking, and the Fremen, even in the book, they are, or they give you the image of having more, a darker c- skin color because of adaptation to the environment, and that they have blue eyes mainly because of the sand they kind of like breathe in, which in the book is a drug, but different topic. And then you kind of see Paul, who comes in as different looking and start to lead the Fremen as a revolt against the royal families who invaded Arrakis after Atreides' family, like Paul's family did. And again, there is also reference in the history for that. During the First World War, there was a scholar, a British one, called Lawrence. Now, there are movies and books called Lawrence in Arabia. And if you know who that is, then you know why I'm seeing the parallels between Paul and Lawrence. Lawrence came during the First World War to the Arabs and also grouped them together. And the thing with Lawrence is he was also an outsider, like Paul. And what it kind of gives you is the thought of, do you really need an outsider to bring people together and form a rebellion against empires? Because in terms of our history, like the real one, under Lawrence, the Arabs united against the Ottoman Empire and it fell. And the reason why Lawrence was sent to the Arabs was mainly because the British Empire and the French, they wanted land. They wanted to divide the land of the Arabs between themselves. And they did that. But Lawrence was really just a figure they played with because Lawrence, even in his memoirs, really tells you that he was not expecting such a betrayal from his own country. Now, here's the thing, in short, Lawrence united the Arabs. They revolted against the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire fell after the First World War. And then came the agreement, which was called Sykes and Picot Agreement, in which the French and the British, they divided the Arabic countries and they set up mandates. So the French stayed in Syria, the British stayed in Egypt and Palestine. Like you can read yourself in the story, but they just divided, the region. With Paul, he didn't divide Arrakis. He came, he united them, and then he started a fight, which in the second movie he kind of won. For the third movie, if you didn't read the book, I'm not going to spoil you, but that's where kind of the resemblance stops. Potentially. I can't elaborate because then I'm spoiling you. Um, but yeah, so these were the references that I personally liked, um, because they're so creative. And the thing is, if you as a European or you grew up in the West, you're not that well taught in terms of Middle Eastern history, right? A lot of conflicts there you can't really explain to yourself because you don't know how they happened. because they stretch so back into the past that you need to revisit certain old topics to understand the current state of the Middle East. And I think that's why Dune is so interesting, because once you get the historical references, you'll be like, oh, this is actually interesting and relevant. And it kind of entices you to go back and read actual history books. And that's why science fiction that really points to our past is so important, because otherwise, certain people would never look back into history. And if you don't look back into history, chances are you're not really going to learn from the mistakes of history, because we change over time, and so should the perception of our past and the mistakes we did there change, because we shouldn't be, sitting and doing the same things over and over again just because we didn't understand that we did them once. Yeah, I think that's it for today. And again, thank you for listening.